Explain that before we get into everything else.
Well, we were both in New York. We lived in New York.
We mean Manhattan.
Manhattan, yeah. Of course.
Thank you.
And was it something I said?
Sorry I can't share it with all of you. I know how jealous this makes everyone.
Anyway,
Yeah, barely, but
we both lived in Manhattan, and Henry produced a play off Broadway the same season that I produced a play off Broadway.
that's right.
And we met at Downey's, I think, which was the restaurant.
Jim Downey's Steakhouse.
Yeah, which everybody went to from the Actors Studio.
No, which everyone went to, but who couldn't get into Sardi's, because
Yeah.
in Sardi's you had to wear a tie. And this was the first restaurant in New York for show business folk where you could go without a tie, and therefore everybody of the new theater went there, including the British invasion, which was in town at that time, in the early 60s.
That's
Did
what
we meet there? We actually met there?
It seems to me, it's a good story. Anyway.
Oh.
I can't think where else we could meet that's more interesting.
And Howard was researching this, and this is going to become the odd couple.
Did you feel we're denying you your role in this?
Okay.
Harry, take over.
But that is how long we've known each other. And we did our first joint television show. Actually, you had done a television show before?
No, I don't think so.
Which we have, can be found on YouTube and is hysterical. It goes on for 7 or 8 episodes of several hours.
He's very casual in it, I'm smoking.
You're very self-conscious.
It was 1971.
He's a little pretentious, actually.
A little bit.
But he had this huge successful film, and I had this big flop, which turned out to be a brilliant film that nobody recognized. And then they opened in the same theater, a new theater called the Columbia 1 and the Columbia 2. I was at the bottom of the Columbia 2, and if somebody accidentally, after reading the reviews, his was last picture show, so if somebody accidentally came downstairs to go to my A Safe Place, the usher said, no, the movie you want to see is upstairs. So my parents were downstairs.
So that is where the love-hate thing started.
No, love-hate started much earlier, because he was talking about these people, Ford, and people who to me were old things, because Truffaut and Feeney and Ingmar Bergman were what excited me at that time. He was talking about a lot of dead guys.
No, they were alive then.
Dead
Howard Hawks, John Ford, Alfred Hitchcock, the great directors.
What can't put Hitchcock among the great directors?
I put him right up there.
Don't mention Orson.
Well, Orson was why we're here. Obviously, he wasn't a great director, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't go out for, I'm trying to think of one, Henry King.
That's good. That's good. Nobody knows who that is.
That's why I said Sam Wood. Go ahead, Harry.
Harry was both our agents. He was both our agents.
You will tell them Andy Simmons story.
That's exactly what I was about to do. Can I do it before, just to get the... I made a couple of films that were brilliant, and nobody liked them, and I felt they were terrible. And since then, there's been some nice response, but they were disasters economically. Safe Place and Traps. And then I made a silly little movie called Sitting Ducks with my brother and a friend, and it became kind of popular. So I was hired right after Animal House by the guy who produced Animal House, Andy Simmons, to make a little comedy, a section of a comedy. There were going to be 3 directors. So anyway, it was a piece of garbage. Orson encouraged me because he said, see if you can function in their world instead of in our little art world. Life will be much easier for you. So I tried it. I had a good time. I thought, I'm doing this great. I got to direct Richard Whitmore, which was exciting. And that little guy who played the Gunzel, what's his name? The Gunzel.
Oh yeah.
And so it was. And then I
Elijah Cook Jr. Right.
Well, Elijah Cook, thank you. And then I came to edit it, and I was told you can't edit it because you're not in the editors union. And they had suddenly I learned what the mainstream was about, and I wasn't allowed to touch my own film. And they chopped it up, put music in it, threw Henny Youngman in the middle of it. I mean, it was really disastrous, and it solved my problem of never needing to deal with a major thing again. But that's not what I was telling you. Why was I telling you this?
I don't know, Henry.
That's right. So this piece of garbage was now there, and I had no name meaning anything because I made 2 flops and 1 little comedy. And so I asked through my agent, who was Harry, to have my name taken off the film because it was embarrassing. It was a piece of real garbage. They never even figured out how to release it theatrically, and I don't. I think it's called Movie Madness now. It's really dumb. It's really so dumb you can't believe it. All I asked was my name to be taken off, and Matty Simmons, the producer, very arrogantly refused, though he could gain nothing from having my name on it. And we got into some kind of a tussle. All I remember about the experience and why I'm here tonight is that this gentleman on my left, who was my agent, took Matty Simmons when he was being very rude to me, and in my memory, held him up to a window, and I don't know, we were in what building was that? Universal or whatever, the tower, and threatened to throw him out of the window if he didn't just behave decently. That's all he was asking him. And I never thought that an agent would rise to one's defense that way. It impressed me profoundly. He never got me any work, but he stood up for me. He stood up for me, and seriously, the part of that it has been my whole life a pleasure to remember. It was the fact that you stood up for me, who could do no good for you, against these guys who were in your world and you needed various ways to deal with it. It was very impressive. Very, very impressive. That's right, and Orson, I told Orson this whole story, and he said, "Would you be my agent?" I don't have an agent right now. That's the kind of guy you need for an agent.
Let's not make it.
Because he always said that everything bad, I'm sure you heard this, that everything bad that happened to him happened from agents and lawyers. Yeah. Film schools didn't have the cachet or the destructive ability that they now have.
Can we get on with this?
Stopping you.
Clara and Julie Kuperberg, I've known for quite a long time. My father was a good friend of mine. His name was Robert Kuperberg, and unfortunately he died a few years ago. Robert had one of the most distinctive voices in the history of any business, and he would call me virtually once a week with another idea of a French film, obscure French film that he thought we should remake. Every time he called, Harry, Robert. I said to him about 50 times. I said, Robert, nobody else in the world sounds like you. You don't have to tell me it's Robert.
True.
Yeah. Okay. So Robert started, and then Clara and Julia on their own, and then together, I should say first, they just love American cinema. And they much prefer American cinema than French cinema.
Oh yeah, true. Again.
And Robert and Clara and Julia have been making documentaries about American movies and American people who make American movies and who are in American movies. Unfortunately, they don't get seen. So when they called me and told me they were coming over to do their next movie, which they're doing now, which is about Billy Wilder, I thought this would be a really great idea to kind of introduce them and the film and get all these fantastic people together to sort of see the film and also talk about it, of course. You know, Clara and Julia made, how many is it, 27, 30?
Yeah, 27.
27?
Yeah.
27 documentaries. And
Wow.
they're just, you can Google all this. They did one woman who ran Hollywood Censored, Orson Welles, screwball comedy when Hollywood went mad, Los Angeles film noir, Hollywood the Indestructible, Sidney Korshak, Hollywood's favorite fixer, In Search for the Ideal Male Made in Hollywood, The Warner Saga, Steve Shapiro. Actually, we had up on Steve Shapiro on the Jeremy Foster was in it.
Who's Steve Shapiro? Again, but I would.
John Ford, Monument Valley, Milos Forman, Taking Off in America, and on and on. And they also did one of Stephen Mouse, Rich. Stephanie Jones, Frank Sinatra, on and on. So, I wanted you to know who they were, and you should really see their movies because they are terrific. My question to begin with is, would you tell them what you have to do to get these movies made, and how you reached out for Feeney and Henry and Joe and FX? Just a little bit about how this all happened.
For this movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the first thing was we wanted to do a movie about Orson Welles because it was the centennial last year. It would have been 100 years, so it's like huge. So we wanted to make a documentary about him, and we wanted to have only people who knew him, not historians or critics, but people who just work with him and can talk about him personally. So we contacted Joseph McBride here, and he told us to contact his daughter, Chris, which is in the documentary. And after we read, of course, the Peter Bogdanovich books, and we knew that Henry Jaglom worked with him. So after Clara and I, we talked, and we decided to interview the people here because they were just perfect for the documentary. And I think you can see it in the documentary. I mean, it's really moving, and it's not like a class about Orson Welles, but it's not a class. We didn't want to make something like like university, not in a bad way, but still.
And where did these pictures get seen?
I mean, all over the world. It's been selected at Cannes Festival, in Tokyo Film Festival,
On French television.
in the French television, in all over the world actually, except here, except in America.
Explain the reason for that.
This is difficult because here you have a lot of laws for the clearance for the rights that we don't have in Europe. So it's easier for European to just sell in Europe, because here it would cost
The
less.
rights to the films.
Yeah, it would really be expensive. You have to clear everything, you have to ask everybody in the trailer, even the one who died, who's dead, that
Which
it's
is
there.
hard.
Yeah, so it's like, it's a nightmare. So, so that's why.
I suggest next time you just don't ask anybody, don't mention
We
it.
thought about it, but will you be our lawyer, because we don't want to take the risk.
I've done it on many films.
Yeah. Good to know.
Yeah.
There's fair use though now, isn't there, with where in a nonfiction context you can use
Yeah.
So keep that in mind, that word
Yeah.
fair use, that's the voodoo word to use.
Thanks for the tip.
Clara, you want to add anything to that?
No, I totally agree with her. She's my sister, she has to be agreeable. That's her job. So I have to be agreeable anytime, for everything.
What's very funny about the way they speak is most of the time, it's Julia, who you just heard, who speaks English very well, and Clara a little less well. Tonight, for some reason, it started taking the other way around.
No,
Anyway.
I'm the one with the bad accent.
Yeah, you are. That's
So,
Yes, you are.
the format that
Could I ask, I'm fascinated by how you love American films so much, and you are such experts. This is like if you ever did a box set, it would be a wonderful educational tool, because
Yeah.
there's so much history and love. And what makes you love American films more than French films, would you
our
say?
father was a maniac. We've been raised to John Ford, and to The Searchers was the first movie I think we've seen at 5. And it's Psycho. Psycho and The Searchers, and we were 5.
Yeah.
So now we're here.
Yeah.
Psycho at 5?
Yeah, Psycho
And
and
The
5.
Searchers.
Good experience. Good experience.
I think hardly taken to 20.
Norman Bates and Ethan.
Yeah. You see him differently at 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think any filmmakers.
Not so bad if
That's not bad.
Any filmmakers who have the guts to make a movie about Sidney Korshak deserve a lot of respect, because
Yeah.
this guy was the mafia's guy in Hollywood, and he was a killer, and you had, nobody in America would make a film with this guy, they'd be too afraid of it. But you went it, I mean, so maybe seeing the searchers in Psycho made you
Very
fearless.
Did you have anybody telling you not to make Rorschach movies?
No, actually no. People were really kind to us. I mean, people wanted to kill us. And nobody wanted to kill us. And we didn't receive any threats. And that's it. We're still here. And see, anyway, I mean, the documentary has been shown in Europe, right? So in Europe, nobody knows Sidney Rorschach. And here, it hasn't been shown. So hopefully, this was good.
That might
So.
be the answer.
Did you recall that information? No.
No, we tried.
Okay, so what we're gonna try and do with this, because in researching this, we could be here for weeks talking about Orson Welles and talking about the connection to him. So, I mean, I wouldn't mind that, it's so rich and so interesting, but, I had a conversation with FX about the way to do this so that, we would not control it, because obviously you can't control the people who just what we want to do is try to have some structure to it. And what FX and I talked about was the idea that we would begin with Peter, who met Orson on the set of Catch-22. And then we would go, we'll let it progress after that. And Joe would talk about how he got in, not being an actor, got into the first Orson Welles movie. FX will talk about the politics, which I didn't really know. I learned tonight that he was blacklisted. I didn't really know that. And there seems to be some question about whether he really was.
There's a question about that.
Okay, good fight about that one. But,
I love FX's book, but there is a serious question about that. Orson claimed he was not blacklisted, and then he would turn around and say he was blacklisted.
I think the question, Joe settles it by pointing out that he was in red channels. He was listed in red channels, which is the kind of the Bible of the blacklist. That's where you could.
Many people who were not blacklisted were listed in red channels, and it was you can certainly call it part of the blacklist at some point. But many people in there were never.
Well, you had to get off the blacklist if you were in red channels. It was a scurrilous booklet. If you want to go to the Academy Library, you can read it, but it's behind a locked case. It's like pornography. It lists the affiliations, the left-wing affiliations of a lot of people in show business. And it's been said by cultural historians that if you're in red channels, you were de facto blacklisted.
So you think Orson was blacklisted?
Yes, and I think it's, for example, all the books before I started writing about it said he left America in 1948. Well, I found out in his FBI file he left in November 47.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a new book on Welles in Italy that places him there as early as November 3rd, 1947. And the HUAC hearings were right before that. And it's no accident that he fled the country.
No, the atmosphere was definitely part of
Yeah.
the cause, but you're suggesting that he was actually blacklisted.
Yeah, I think he was maybe gray listed because he did do a couple jobs like the Third Man.
Right.
David Selznick didn't want him in the Third Man because he said Welles is a liability politically in America.
But he was in the third.
But Carol Reed said, no, I want him in the film. And
So blacklisted people weren't, so maybe,
Well,
maybe saying gray list is. the-
gray listed is maybe more accurate. But
Well, he did stay away from America for a long
Yes.
time.
yeah, he left
For
America.
that whole period.
Yeah.
The whole period from 47 to 56.
47 to, he didn't come back till 57.
Yeah, and the only company that would hire him in the 50s was CBS. So he must have made a deal with CBS. You could write a letter to the head of a company and get cleared if you say, I'm sorry for all my affiliations. He never would have informed them people, but,
There's no letter from him.
well, nobody's found it, but there must have been. But I've seen letters like that by other people where they say,
Because there are letters from other people doesn't mean there was a letter from him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or because you're putting together, what seems logical. There is no evidence, and he says he never wrote a letter of any kind like that, so.
he said that?
Yes.
Okay.
Also, one must, in dealing with the subject of HUAC in that era, knowing that Welles was as clever as he was, that he would see what was happening and simply sidestep aside as the pendulum was swinging for everybody else.
No
He
question.
stepped to Europe and.
No question, I'm only referring to the idea that CBS, that somehow they could get an exemption. Nobody got exemptions. They got either full pardons by talking and naming names.
Well, no,
or they were blacklisted.
You could work for a certain company, like Philip Dunn showed me his letter he wrote to Daryl Zanuck at Fox. He was a Fox screenwriter. and he repented all his liberal
Yes,
associations.
I'm saying unless you wrote something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
which
wrote a
there's-
letter. Rita Hayworth wrote a letter like that.
Which there's no evidence that Orson ever wrote any such letter.
Well, it may turn up in some archive, but John Houseman wrote a letter like that.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
He did, but Orson didn't, is my point, or said he did.
He said to you, he did.
He said to me, one, he didn't, and two, it's never shown up, and there's been tremendous amount of research.
Okay, well, maybe that he, as FX said, he had the wisdom to flee the country, stay away all during that terrible time.
Yeah. And managed to make that deal somehow.
Moving on.
No, but his politics, it's key though, that his politics are such a crux of his work, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's,
He never forgave Kazan, and, you know, he was very, very strong to the end of his life about people who caved and who named names.
Also, in the 50s, the films he made in Europe, Othello, is about interracial romance. He couldn't make that in Hollywood. He had trouble getting it distributed in America. Mr. R. Cotton has been interpreted as a Cold War parable, with Wells playing Stalin and Robert Arden playing Nixon. Then he comes here and he makes Touch of Evil, which is an attack on police corruption, which got him in trouble again. Then he goes to Trial as a film about civil liberties and police state.
I like that interpretation, he would enjoy that.
So a lot of his films are very political during that period.
It was always very
And he
constant.
did that series Around the World with Orson Welles, which is very anti-American in very subtle ways for British television, criticizing America by contrast with European society.
It's probably worth establishing at this point in the conversation, just for background, because this is something.
we have no structure for this.
Yeah, so just to point out that in the 1930s and 40s, Wells was very serious about political aspirations. He even mentions it in your film. He says, I should have gone into politics. That was no idle dream for him. He had gotten to know Franklin Roosevelt, and Roosevelt, as he says in his screenplay, The Big Brass Ring, loved to cultivate energetic young men and invite them to dream politically. So in the 1940s, he had a very successful, widely read newspaper column, and he was on the radio. And with respect to Touch of Evil and its themes, when 19 young men were falsely accused of what were called the Zoot Suit murders, the Sleep of the Goon murders, Wells was on the radio time and again, and he helped get those convictions overturned. In 1943 and 44, and then in 45, he went on the radio again to crusade for justice because a black GI named Isaac Woodard got home, was discharged. The day he was discharged, he simply asked to stop the bus so he could use a restroom, and the bus driver got mad, called the sheriff, and the sheriff blinded Isaac Woodard with his billy club, and blinded him for life. And so Wells, and the sheriff's name was concealed, as it was later in Ferguson. And so Wells was on the radio saying, I want to know, Officer X.
Amazing radio program that everybody should try to find.
You can find it on YouTube.
And
Is it
also-
on YouTube now?
Yes.
Yeah. Wells lost his radio audience because of his principles there. He was doing these highly impassioned, angry broadcasts, and his sponsor pulled the plug on him, and he could never again in American radio make political broadcasts. And that's another reason he went to Europe. He was deprived of that forum that he had. And there's a documentary on the Isaac Woodard case, which is terrific. I don't know why it hasn't come out, but Wells was very political. And when he came back to America, he had to disguise that and be a little cagey about it. But if you look at a film like The Other Side of the Wind, there are many political aspects in that film. He was less overt about it. He didn't make speeches. He made a speech against nuclear power in New York, and that was about it. But he was cagey about it. Also, like a lot of blacklisted people, he didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to admit that he had been blacklisted. There's nothing shameful about it, but it wouldn't have helped his career to boast about it. So I think that he was one of those people in the gray area. There were many, many people we don't even know about or think about who were suffering from blacklist, like Hattie McDaniel, the great actress who won an Oscar for Gone with the Wind, the first black performer. She was graylisted. She suffered terribly. She died young because of this. Nobody talks about her. Dorothy Commodore was perhaps the most tragic victim of the blacklist. Susan Alexander and Citizen Kane. We mainly hear about Dalton Trumbo and the Hollywood 10, but there were hundreds of people who were affected in Hollywood. And I think the industry is still affected. I was a screenwriter for a long time, and I can see the tremendous timidity toward political subjects. I once wanted to do a film on The Bay of Pigs, which would make a great movie. Nobody's ever done that. And my agent said, well, you can't do that. And I said, why? And she said, well, it's political. you know. So, I mean, the fear is still out there, folks.
Funny talking about that. I remember having a conversation with Kuperberg, obviously many years ago, about if that was not the kind of rollicking comedy it was, even though it was Kuperberg, he probably would have done it.
Right, he had trouble in that film too, the FBI was poking around it, you know. Yeah. So, I mean, the atmosphere.
And yet Kubrick made the greatest anti-war film ever made.
Yeah.
Was
Pass the Glory.
Path of Glory, and there was never any controversy about
Well,
it.
the French government, they banned the
Except
film in
France, yeah, I meant
Yeah.
to, among our right wing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Wells was always very political in his films, even if he had to be more careful publicly, his films are still political, all the way to the end.
But he ended up liking to make fun of his own, anybody else who was progressive, he wanted to show that they were, he was like always teasing one about that. How he liked conservatives better. They were people who he could, sort of trust, like John Wayne and everything.
I think in your book, conversation book, there's a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, he's provoking me.
He's provoking and bullshitting.
Yeah, that's trying, and I'm rising to the bait.
Well, and Henry got Wells to write The Big Brass Ring, which is all about a political candidate who has scandals in his past. And FX wound up writing the screenplay and adapting it for television and film. So these two guys were helping Wells complete his, you were prodding him to get back into contemporary political subject.
Yeah, well, he wanted to do that.
Let's try and come back.
Yes.
You're here.
The first time you met him, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it didn't happen on the set of Catch-22, but it started way back in 1961 when I curated the first Orson Welles retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Manhattan. And I wrote an accompanying monograph, which was sent to Orson somewhere in Europe where he was shooting the trial. That was about 1961. 7 years later, I get a phone call. I'm here, I've made a film, I have a child, I'm married now. And the phone rings, I answer, he says, hello, is Peter Bogdanovich there? I recognize the voice. I said, yes, this is Orson Welles. This is Peter Bogdanovich. Orson says, I can't tell you how long I've wanted to meet you. I said, wait a minute, that's my line. I said, why did you want to meet me? Because you have published the truest words ever written about me. Pause, in English. And he said, what are you doing tomorrow around 3 o'clock? I said, nothing. He said, will you come meet me at the Polo Lounge at the Beverly Hills Hotel? I said, sure. So I went over the next day, and he was there, and as Henry said, he was very big and overwhelming. He had a cape or something. And no. And we sat in the Polo Lounge for about 3 hours talking. And he was so disarming, as Orson could be, so disarming, that within an hour or so, I felt like I'd known him for a long time. I found myself so comfortable with him that I even had the temerity to say, there's one film of yours I don't really like. Which one? The Trial. And Orson said, I don't either. And I thought, wow, what a thing we got going here. And I had just published a book about John Ford, an interview book about John Ford. And Ford was Orson's favorite American director. And so I gave him a copy of the book inscribed, and he said, thank you. And he says, I had directed one movie by then, it was not a hit or anything, but Orson made a comment. He said, well, it's too bad you're such a famous director now, you can't write a little book like this about me. And I said, I'd love to do an interview book with you. Fine, let's do it. And that's when I went to Guaymas, Mexico, where Orson was acting in Mike Nichols' version of Catch-22. And when we really did an interview book for about 4 or 5 years, we did tape. And one of the times, about a year after this meeting, I said something slightly derogatory about the trial, and Orson says, I wish you'd stop saying that. I said, well, you told me you didn't like the picture. No, I like it very much. I just said that to please you. Because I admire, I respect your opinion. But every time you denigrate my work, you diminish my small treasure. I said, oh shit, Orson. I'm sorry, that's all right, fine. We'll drop the subject. So from then on, he always referred to the trial as that picture you hate. So he says, the reason you perhaps didn't understand that we thought it was funny. The trial is funny, I said? He said, yes. Tony Perkins and I were laughing all the way through it. He said, so now we're in Paris, this is a few years later, and we're in Paris, and he says, they're running that picture you hate on the right bank tomorrow. Do you want to go? And I said, yeah, but what are they running it for? Well, they're running the picture and then they're giving me a prize, an award. Really? And a check. What's the check for? For accepting the award. I said, you mean you're getting paid to accept the award? Of course, you don't think I'd accept an award without being paid for it. So Jean Moreau, the next day, presented him with the check and the award, and the check went in there and the award was there. And we looked at the trial. Now I was sitting right next to him, and he started to chuckle during the picture. And because he was chuckling, I had aware at a certain place. I said, "Oh, I see. That is funny." I started to get it. So I started laughing, and he was laughing, and the French people were turning around and saying, "Shh." Orson Welles and Peter Bogdanovich are laughing during Kafka by Orson Welles. It was not nice. So nobody laughed. The next day, Orson says, they showed it last night at the left bank also, and there everybody laughed. So that's how I met him. And then I was on the Catch-22 set for a while, a few days. My God. That was when Orson was still drinking. He stopped drinking shortly after this, but he was still drinking. He did not get along with Mike Nicholas. He did not get along with Mike at all. He had a very funny attack. Orson had a very funny attack on the role that he was cast as the general. Yeah. He wanted to play it like a guy who'd been through this war and was absolutely exhausted. So when Alan Arkin appears in front of him naked, Orson wanted to play it, Ufland, where's your uniform? Like that. And Mike said, no, harder. Orson, a little more. And Orson just said, give me the reading, Mike. Where's your uniform, Yossarian? And Orson did it that way, it wasn't good. But Mike liked it. And that night, Orson was growling about Mike Nicholas. And he got quite drunk. And I'll never forget it. He said, he suddenly out of the blue, he said, do you know a book named Lord Jim?